Alright my friends, welcome back to All Cars. I am John and it is time for another Motorweek Retro review reaction. This is the 1992 Chevy Lumina APV. I did a recent reaction to the Chevy Lumina, the car itself, and as several of you have pointed out, why on earth did Chevy take the Lumina name and expand it to something like an MPV? And I found myself wondering whether they were trying to turn this into almost like a sub-brand, like a Ford is doing with the Bronco, for example. But I don't really know. I do know this is a terrible car. Now, we didn't have, I don't think it was just this generation, I think it was the next generation, but we did at one time have the Saturn platform mate of this car, and it was absolutely atrocious. It did not hold up at all. However, on a test drive, we really like how it rode. We liked it better than the Dodge or the Ford option at the time. So I'm really excited to see what Motorweek says about this car when it's brand spanking new, and kind of reminisce a little bit about what we did like about it and how it didn't hold up very well. So come on down a trip with memory lane with me.
Motorweek is made possible by Lucas Oil, TireRack.com, and RockAuto.com.
If we had to choose one vehicle segment that has experienced the most change over the years, it would have to be the family car. Sedans and station wagons once dominated this market. Now minivans and sport utility vehicles provide the same comfort and performance with even more cargo space. The Chevrolet Lumina APV is one of these new generation family haulers. High style and versatile seating marked its 1990 debut. Now there's enough change to the 92 model to grab our attention all over again.
You know, and styling wise, it's easy to look back on this and be very critical of it. Some of the design choices and what you ended up with in terms of packaging, let's say. But I do want to try to be fair here. While I could look at this and be like, what the heck were GM designers thinking? This was out of the box thinking. When you, to me anyway, when you think about what the Dodge Caravan was doing, you think about Ford's attempts, you think about the Chevy Astro that they had out there, to go with this futuristic long nose where it runs straight into the windshield almost. They were really kind of thinking out of the box. Of course, it became known as the Dust Buster minivans for the resemblance to the vacuum cleaner, but I want to be very critical of it, but actually I can't. In 1992, these looked futuristic compared to the other things out there. It unfortunately looks very narrow, even if functionally I don't think it was. I appreciate that they tried to do something not generic and not boring, which is something that GM could have been accused of a lot. They actually tried to think outside the box here. They just implemented it kind of poorly.
When the Chevrolet Lumina APV was introduced 2.5 years ago, we were generally impressed with the plastic body design of a vehicle that looked a lot like a Disney World monorail train. Then we had a Lumina APV in our long-term fleet. 1 year and 35,000 miles later, we had only two complaints. One was the powertrain. Our front-drive APV was powered by a 3.1-liter V6 mated to a 3-speed automatic transmission. That's an adequate powertrain to motivate a lightly loaded Lumina, but passing, climbing, and cruising with a fully packed vehicle requires more. Apparently, Chevrolet thought so too. While the same powertrain is standard fare for the 1992 Lumina APV, General Motors' Gutsy 3800 V6 is available as an option. The multi-port fuel-injected 3.8-liter engine develops 165 horsepower. That's 45 more horsepower than the standard engine. Torque is up 55 pound-feet to 220.
So I'm going to jump in, and you know, the 3.1, I'm not a big fan of the engine. I know several of you are not as well, and made it to a 3-speed, and that just really gets me, because this is, I've talked about it before. My opinion, overarching opinion, is that, repeated many times by me, GM couldn't get it all right all at the same time. So they had this engine that was barely adequate, not terribly great, and then they had it to a 3-speed automatic at a time when the rest of the world was getting 4 speeds. It just showed me GM went out and designed this platform with this futuristic look and just stuck whatever corporate parts they had underneath the hood. Now the 3800, I deeply respect the 3800 engine. Not exactly a fire breather in terms of power. You know, the march of progress, my 4-cylinder makes more power than that 3800 does, but much better engine, much more reliable, and much gutsier for motivating what's kind of a large vehicle.
The engine is now mated to a 4-speed transmission. Together, they raise the Lumina's trailering capacity to 3,000 pounds. 0 to 60 now takes 9.6 seconds. That's nearly 3 seconds faster than the 3.1 engine. The Lumina APV has a 109.8-inch wheelbase and a low center of gravity. While there was a moderate amount of push through the slalom, the optional 15-inch tires provided good grip. Body roll is much less than you expect in a van. On the open road, the Lumina APV offers its occupants a comfortable ride. 3.8-liter fuel economy is EPA rated at 17 city and 24 highway. Our combined test loop returned 21 miles per gallon. That's the same results we got with the smaller engine.
Not bad results, actually. I mean, that's the thing about this van is there's how it held up over a longer period of time, and then there's the feel of something that doesn't show up in the numbers, right? The actual feel of the vehicle. And so the numbers are pretty competitive. They say it handles better than, you know, a minivan. The acceleration is not blazingly fast, but it's fine. It's competitive. And the ride is comfortable. And I know the one we had, I don't remember what engine it had in it. I'll be honest with you. It was very comfortable. At speed, it was light steering around town. It was a comfortable van. And I'll talk more about why we chose it over some of the competitors. But at first blush, when you first drive it, it actually largely drove well. And I want to say here that in a lot of ways, there's 2 ways to build cars. There's the long-term happiness with it, and there's you've made it to shine on a 15-minute test drive. And I think a lot of GM cars, and I think this van really almost personifies it for me now that I'm thinking about it, the success on a test drive. But once you kind of dig beneath the surface and some of the less or more thoughtful portions, it kind of falls down. Let's see what else they say.
4-wheel anti-lock brakes are standard for 1992 and help stop the 3,500-pound Lumina APV from 60 miles per hour in a good average distance of 126 feet.
That's a really good result for a minivan. You know, if it was a BMW, that'd be like, yeah, that's not very good. But for a van this large, yeah, that's not bad. That's not bad.
Aero styling and swept back angles are central to the Lumina's dramatic design theme. Chevrolet also hid the antenna in the roof for added sleekness. The second problem we have with the APV design is its huge windshield. While it gives the interior a spacious and airy feel, it also makes it hard for the driver to see over the APV's nose. That makes parking tricky. It is, however, easy to see the deeply hooded gauges. Standard seating is for 5, while 6 or 7 passenger modular seating is optional. Modular design means that seats can be removed to create a seating or cargo pattern to suit individual needs. The base price for a Lumina APV is $15,570, while the CL version starts at $17,355. The Chevrolet Lumina APV and its Pontiac Transport and Oldsmobile Silhouette companions are not everyone's minivan choices. The huge windshield puts lots of buyers off. However, the APV's combination of distinctive appearance, plastic exterior, and highly versatile seating is now significantly enhanced with a stronger engine, better transmission, and standard 4-wheel ABS. It may not be as much fun as a day with Disney, but it's sure nice to come home in.
So, you know, the styling is just kind of awkward. Again, I want to try to be fair to GM doing something different with a minivan rather than just copying everybody else. But, you know, the styling dead on. The way the windshield is done, it actually makes it look like it has a big hammerhead forehead. The other problem with the windshield is, while, you know, the styling was kind of controlling everything, you know, this is form over function, you ended up with a monstrous dash. And as we've moved through the decades to cab forward and front wheel drive and sleeker cars, dashes have steadily gotten longer. But this was ridiculous. It really was. And so the windshield ended down there somewhere, and you're sitting way back here, and it was awkward. It really, really was. The stylist led the design of this, and it just didn't ever quite come together. And to me, that vehicle looks like kind of a hodgepodge of different thoughts. Now, why did we get the Saturn? I don't know that I've ever discussed it on the channel. When we had cars and we had our first child, I think our second one was on the way at the time, and my first wife and I, we decided we were going to get a minivan. And neither one of us really wanted one, but she had a friend who had a minivan. It was a Kia minivan, as a matter of fact, and loved it, and absolutely swore once you had a minivan, you loved them, regardless of what your feelings were going into it. And my wife had spent some time with them, and sure enough, she loved the minivan. So we decided we were going to get one, and we went and we were looking used. And I was kind of leaning towards the Ford, but we didn't really like the Windstar. Again, it kind of felt like Ford rushed it out, and it's kind of half-hearted. It wasn't bad. Interesting end note, one of her aunts, I believe, had a Windstar, and when we got the Saturn, she was like, wish I'd gotten one of those instead. So that's how Windstar drivers felt. And we drove the Caravan, and it was certainly competitive in terms of price, but it felt light. It felt too light. That was our complaint. The steering wheel felt thin, and it just, you know, what made it more car-like worked against it. It didn't feel like it had any real substance to it. Now, hindsight being what it is, I wish we got the Dodge, because we're not the Lumina, this platform for GM fell down is, other than style leading actual function, they did the bare minimum to make it minivan competitive. Like, they show that guy taking the seat out, okay? You leaned it forward, you undid a latch, and you lifted. And minivan seats are famously heavy, but these were brutally heavy at a time when you're moving into Dodge coming out with the fold and go system where you don't have to take it out at all. GM just wasn't revolutionizing it. They thought putting a plastic mold on the back of the seat with a couple cup holders is all you really needed. It was not a very functional interior. Whether the dimensions would back it up or not, it felt very, very narrow, certainly in the back when you tried to move things around, and you had to move out these heavy seats at the same time. You ended up with a bunch of half-hearted stuff. Then add on to that really cheap materials, and I can't tell you the plastic breaking down, the rubber around the windscreen coming out. It literally fell apart, and that's one of the reasons I say every GM car I've owned has been worse than the previous one. We also really liked the look of the Saturn. It had a more traditional nose on it, and in a short ride, it drove the best. The steering wheel was substantive. We liked the dash layout. The dash material was cheap, but we liked that it was had a little texture to it, and the steering had a little bit of heft. But the biggest thing, other than quality, was the more you drove it and then rode in other people's minivans, the more it felt like GM built this on a skateboard. And again, measurements and dimensions might not back this up, but it literally felt like the old cars, the old cars, right? Where here's a chassis and you're sitting on top of it. Whereas you sat high in a Dodge or in a Odyssey or in a Sienna later on, you might sit high, but you feel like you were at least sitting down between the wheels. The more you drove the GM products, the more it felt like you were perched on top of everything. It felt worse the longer I drove it, and the more I drove it, it felt narrow. It felt high. It felt tipsy regardless of what this test says. It became worse the longer you owned it. So this was very telling to me, and this is not where I expected this conversation to go, that the Lumina tests well. It's got the power, it's got the gas mileage, it's doing all the things. And again, I think it's designed to feel good on a test drive. But the longer you owned it, the more this showed how far behind GM was in things. Let me know your thoughts below, guys. I appreciate you being here. If you have any questions, let me know. But thanks for spending some minutes with me.